Welcome to the New Thinking for a New World podcast, where we explore the most pressing issues that are challenging and changing our societies. We are looking for new thinking and new solutions wherever we can find them. Listen as host Alan Stoga, the Tällberg Foundation's chairman, challenges his guests for analysis, ideas and actions. Together, we can help make our world at least a bit better.
There are many ways to characterize our era. The most promising is the age of the brain. Today we know more about how the brain works than ever before, and we're moving faster than ever before to extend and apply that knowledge. What a moment ago was science fiction is now science. Unlocking the brain's potential could transform our world. Achieving what from today's perspective would be superhuman cognition could open whole new worlds of medicine, science, technology, and even humanity. Unfortunately, it seems to be one of those obscure laws of physics that every upside has a downside. Every potentially wonderful application of new technology has the possibility of horrible abuse. And that's what we're going to talk about today. My guests are Dr. Rafael Yuste, neuroscientist, whose lab is at Columbia University, and who is on the forefront of developing the new understanding of the brain. And Jared Genser, who's a leading international human rights lawyer. I'm proud to say that both Rafa and Jared are past winners of the Tällberg-SNF-Eliasson Global Leadership Prize. Welcome, Rafa and Jared.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Rafa, today we're going to focus on the work the two of you are doing together to build a global framework within which the wonders of the brain can be developed for the benefit of mankind and hopefully cauterize some of the downside I mentioned. However, before we do that, can you give us 30 seconds on the science?
It may not be a surprise to the audience that the brain happens to be the organ that generates the human mind. All of our cognitive and mental abilities are generated by the firing of hundreds of billions of neurons that we have in our brains. So neurotechnology enables to record that activity and to change that activity. And by changing neural activity and decoding it, in principle, we can decode the minds and change the minds. And that opens up a new set of ethical and societal challenges.
Let me make this practical. I understand that Facebook has been working on a project that would allow people to think and produce words on a screen at something like 100 words per minute. Actually, when you told me that, I immediately assumed that what is one way could be a two-way highway into my brain. Maybe all Facebook wants to do is sell me a toaster, but could they conceivably persuade me that I can't possibly go to bed tonight without having bought a new one?
Okay, so there's two types of neurotechnology. There's neurotechnology to decode, to read, and neurotechnology to activate or to write. And the neurotechnology to read, to decipher mental activity is way ahead of the neurotechnology to interfere with mental abilities. No? So I think Facebook, as far as I know, they're all interested in the decoding part because they want to generate this product as a way to type mentally by thinking. But in order for them to make us change our mind, then you have to actually activate neuronal circuits with a lot of precision. And this is something that we can start to do in animals today, in laboratory animals, but with still far, I would say at least a decade from being able to do this well in human beings.
But a decade passes quickly sometimes. Theoretically, it's possible.
It will be possible because we can do this in animals today, in mice, and what we can do in a mouse today, we should be able to do in a human tomorrow.
I suddenly have the image in my mind of Mighty Mouse from my childhood. But anyhow, Jared, you're a human rights lawyer, very successful human rights lawyer who has a long record of rescuing people and helping them cope with all sorts of nasty issues. What do you see in Rafa's work that appeals to the lawyer and the advocate in you?
Well, look, I think on the one hand, what Rafa is talking about is incredibly exciting for both the development of the human mind and for the advances that we can see coming from this kind of technology, especially as it relates to health and to convenience and kind of advancement of humankind more broadly. But at the same time, as a human rights lawyer, I'm always worried when I see new technologies because of the ways in which governments and private actors can, instrumentalize these kinds of technologies for nefarious purposes. And, undoubtedly, we're already seeing, even before the decade that Rafa is talking about having elapsed, the downside of these technologies are already being put to use. So, for example, in China, there are already several schools that have been piloting a brain-computer interface that children are wearing that are telling the teacher up front at the room on a screen that they see, which children are concentrating based on their brain waves and which ones are not. And similar technology has been deployed already in several Chinese factories to monitor the efficiency of workers. And this is already long before we've even gotten to effective technology that could potentially write to the human brain.
Let me ask you to define not from a technical viewpoint, but perhaps a legal or even human viewpoint. What are we talking about in terms of rights?
I think there are a basic set of rights that Rafa had actually already begun developing before I got involved in partnering with him, which I think are a good thumbnail sketch of the kinds of things that we should be concerned about. And so, some of the proposed neurorights include things like the right to identity and the ability to control your own physical and mental integrity, the right to agency, which is really freedom of thought and freedom to choose your own actions, the right to mental privacy, which is the ability to keep your thoughts protected against disclosure, the right to fair access to mental augmentation, which is really the ability to benefit from improvements that may happen coming from this kind of technology, and the right to be free from algorithmic bias or to ensure that technologies don't insert prejudices into decisions that are being made that affect one's life. I think that more tangibly, one can see that the international human rights system today, in certain areas, will already provide within the current framework of international human rights treaties and law some protections against some of the nefarious purposes to which these technologies could be put, but there are clearly also large gaps in coverage that need to be proactively addressed.
I want to come back to that in a second, but first, Rafa, you're a scientist. Most scientists are quite happy stopping at their laboratory door and leaving the practicality and the implications of their work to others, like Jared. What is it in this set of issues that you're dealing with that has driven you to take the issues beyond the lab into advocacy and into trying to promote a discussion about these issues of neural rights and even neural identity?
I am a neurobiologist, but I got into neuroscience from medicine, and also because of my interest in philosophy, in understanding the human mind. So I cannot help but understand that whatever we do to figure out how the brain works is going to reveal how the mind works, and this science is neutral, and you can use this knowledge for good and for bad. So I think it's probably because of my medical background that I feel very strongly that we should make sure that this great knowledge and this great technology that has so much potential and benefit for humanity should be used for the right reasons to really advance our society and not have any nefarious effects. So I think it's in the bones of every doctor is the Hippocratic oath, the oath, the pledge for beneficence to help people, to do this also with the principle of justice and treating patients with dignity. So I think I'm just applying the the same old-fashioned Hippocratic oath that I sworn in during my medical training.
Let's play it forward. In a perfect world, what would you like to see happen?
I think my dream would be for the UN to update the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which hasn't been touched since its proclamation in 1948, and put it up to date to the 21st century, incorporating protection for all these challenges that Jared has been talking about, which are real. This is not science fiction. This is something that we're going to have to deal with, if not very soon. It's definitely coming our way. It will be unavoidable. So I would love for the UN to take charge and with the updated Human Rights Declaration, then you could imagine this could be an instrument for convention or committees of different countries that will regulate at an international level, at a global level, the development and deployment of neurotechnology. And this, a model for this is what happened with the Atomic Energy Commission, for example. So this was also UN-driven, and it led to an organization which has overseen the development and use of atomic energy since the 1950s, and I would say pretty effectively.
Let me take you on that, because that is exactly how I think about it in the atomic or nuclear weapon comparison. And in fact, there we had a dramatically different experience. We had 2 bombs used in 1945. We then had a brutal Cold War race to develop weapons among 2 and then 3, 4, and 5 different nations. We had an ongoing process. Thank God it was never used, but we built bilateral relations. We only eventually built multilateral relations framework around this, the Atomic Energy Commission, long after both the technology had been used on human beings, and we had gone through this long competition between the Soviets and the Americans, and then with the Chinese and then the Europeans. We would all hope to avoid another Nagasaki in this space. I can think of, and I'm looking for another example where mankind got together and said, oops, this is technology we really need before it is fully developed to manage. Can you think of one?
Yeah, of course. The chemical weapons, they were developed in the First World War, and they were also deployed with horrific consequences in the battleground. And that led to such an outcry of public opinion that since then it's been very effectively regulated. I mean, with a couple of
except in Syria and a number of other places.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that humanity is perfect, but overall, I think we should be proud that chemical weapons, biological weapons, atomic weapons are being regulated and overseen by an international commissions. And there's always an exception here and there, but the important thing is in this case of neurotechnology, like with all these other formidable technologies that can lead to weapons, what's critical is to get the main players involved. So neurotechnology is not being developed by small countries in the third world. They're developed by industrialized nations, particularly the US and Europe, and to some extent Japan and China. So I think as long as we have a consensus between the main players, I'm an optimist. I think this we should be learning from our mistakes of the things we did wrong with atomic energy, for example. As you were pointing out, it was not a rosy path, but we should be. I think this experience is also like COVID has humbled our societies in a way in which it's increasingly clear that we need to cooperate across different countries in a multilateral fashion. And the climate is another example, and I think it's a positive example that how humanity is slowly getting their act together with the climate. So our proposal is maybe with a UN-driven effort if the main players that are developing neurotechnology would be involved, then we could have some guidelines that could be then used to ensure that this technology gets developed and deployed for the benefit of humanity.
I'm afraid I'm in the school that man learns about fire by getting burned. Hopefully I'm wrong on this. Jared, you work all the time within the framework of the United Nations. You're actively at the moment working part of your time with the Organization of American States. The UN has a history, it has a reality. How do you think it's possible to move the United Nations, and in particular its key players, as Rafa pointed out, in a positive direction to try to get our collective arms around these issues before we experience the horrors of trench warfare or the horrors of Nagasaki?
Yeah, well, that is the question, isn't it? And I think the reality is that we are already a decade behind at the UN because the international community is simply not engaged on or discussing these issues in any meaningful way at a global level. And so we really need to jumpstart in dramatic ways what the UN does. And the UN is not often the most nimble of institutions. I think this is why we need really an all of the above approach to working proactively to address these issues. And this includes trying to advance efforts within the UN to have discussions about forthcoming neurotechnology and neurorights, and working in a wide array of ways to get different parts of the system to engage in these issues, to start discussing the possibility of an international treaty that would address the gaps in international law, and move towards the development of a new agency, as Rafa was suggesting, to look at these issues, et cetera. But at the same time, we also need to look at what are the national regulatory frameworks in place, especially in the top 15, 20 countries that have companies and government engagement in developing neurotechnologies. We need to look at the company level and look at questions that relate to neuroethics and what kinds of self-policing can companies be engaged in, and what kind of efforts can be undertaken to drive people towards responsible development of these technologies. And we need to look at the citizen level globally and look at public education and awareness raising for people around the world to understand what is coming, and to be demanding that in their own countries that companies and policymakers focus on both the positive sides of these kinds of technologies, but also act to mitigate the risks associated with these technologies.
If you feel that the world lacks global leaders, please help support the Tällberg Foundation programs. Individual donations are being accepted at tällbergfoundation.org/donate. That's TALLBERG foundation.org/donate.
Rafa, you mentioned before that the United States remains the big kahuna in the neurotechnology world, but is joined there by countries like China, Japan, I imagine a few others. Is it possible to imagine in addition to the multilateral efforts that you have underway, a bilateral U.S.-China effort that could, in a sense mirroring what happened in 1948, could set the stage for something global?
So honestly, Alan, that question about how to spearhead bilateral efforts between the U.S. and China is a little bit above my pay level. At the end of the day, I'm a neuroscientist. I know a lot about the brain, medicine, and I know something about ethical and societal consequences of this technology, but I would not pass myself for a policy maven. And I think I mean, it sounds like a good idea to have a bilateral effort between the U.S. and China, but I wanted to push back on your criticisms that a multilateral approach may not work. Well, first of all, I mean, there's a problem coming our way, whether we want it or not. This is going to happen. We will have this. We'll have to face that problem, and we cannot afford not to act. So not doing something, it's just not acceptable. I mean, we're not going to watch this tsunami hit us while we're with our hands in our pockets. At least I won't. And there's a lot of precedent besides this discussion that we're having earlier about atomic energy, biological weapons, chemical weapons, with lesser threats that are not maybe existential, but there's a lot of good precedent for how a UN-driven international coalition has had a huge impact in the world. So let me just give you a couple of examples. And Jared here is an expert here, but the Committee on Torture, for example, the UN-driven Committee for the Disappeared, that has essentially made it extremely rare and difficult for countries anywhere in the world to torture or disappear their citizens without consequences for their leaders. No? So this, I think, are good things. And I can imagine also what's going on with genetic engineering and the CRISPR international coalitions that, including China, are preventing the use of these technologies in humans. And we also, another idea that I wanted to put on the table is that it may not have to be only driven by the UN. So let me point out what's going on in Chile. So the Senate of Chile has on its own taken on this issue of neurotechnology, and they've pushed for the idea of these neurorights. And they've actually unanimously voted to amend their constitution to make cerebral integrity a basic human right. So this is, I would say, a serious country. It may not be the one of the countries developing in the forefront of neurotechnology, but this is a country that you should take seriously. And if Chile takes a stance, and other countries like Spain could follow, at some point, you could imagine it would be like a domino effect. Now, many countries will jump in, and eventually the UN and other countries will essentially have to be carried on by the swept by this global movement.
Jared, how do we take what Rafa just described as sort of the canary in the mine approach, which is you get a couple canaries and they start singing and others join in? Do you think that is practical? How do you make that work practically?
Undoubtedly it's an uphill struggle because, oftentimes when you see the international community, being aware of even global crises that are on their doorstep, they still hesitate and can't mobilize the political will to act. But at the same time, failure really is not an option here, and we have to persist and do so aggressively and publicly and systematically, because as Rafa said, these developments are fast approaching, and some of them are in fact already here. If the international community doesn't take action, the consequences could be terrible. One of the concerns that I've heard raised is, what's the point of having an international system to be put in place when, the bad actors, the China and Russias of the world, and frankly, even maybe the United States, depending on how it decides to deploy this technology, could do bad things. And I think the reality is that, the development of an international treaty, for example, to advance neurorights isn't designed at the worst of the worst who are going to do whatever they want regardless, right? It's really looking at that middle group of maybe 60 or 70% of the world that, if there are international standards set, they're going to want to be viewed as, as acting in accordance with them, and you assume there's probably 10 or 15% on one side or the other side that will, undoubtedly want to take positive actions regardless of international standards, and, another 10 or 15% that will do bad things regardless of what standards are put in place. But setting global expectations around how this technology can be both developed and how the downside risk can be managed, and also creating an international human rights system that will ensure that individual people of the world have the right to protections from misuse of this technology by states and others is, I think, exceptionally important because it will drive the global discussion and will encourage strongly many people that have not up until now, or would not up until now, focus on this question to simply decide that they will abide by those international standards that have been developed.
Well, having a global discussion would be a great place to start, and you both have a lot to do with that effort. I'd like to go to the individual. Rafa and Jared, both of you have referred to the role of the citizen, the role of the scientist, the role of the tech company, potentially in creating both awareness of this problem and commitment to do something about it. What can the individual do to try to get governments that maybe are a little backward looking to engage on this issue?
So I'm a firm believer of act locally but think globally. So any one of us lives in small communities, and we may have access or not to larger communities or to policymakers or leaders. No? But I think, like with every important cause, I think we should take it personally and work with our communities. No? And the Chile is a wonderful example. So for reasons that could be accidental, Chile jumps in, and there's a local effort in one part of the world, and this could lead to a larger effort. And we've seen that happen before. Actually, I was talking about the Committee for the Disappeared. My understanding is that was also driven by starting locally, also in Latin America, and eventually it went globally through the UN. I have to tell you that Jared and I are actually engaging the UN on this debate, on this issue, and probably because of what's going on in Chile and other things, they're going to. They just called us for a discussion, an internal discussion on the issue. So the UN is watching carefully what's going on. And if you imagine that you work in a tech company, well, and you think this is an important issue, so you could imagine building consensus inside the company, again, acting locally but thinking globally. The companies should be partners in this. They're not the bad guys. They should understand this is also it's in everyone's interest of the community, of the humanity. No?
I would imagine, given the importance of the United States in neuroscience and neurotechnologies, that there is no real chance of accomplishing what we need to accomplish without the United States. Very specifically, and this isn't a podcast about America, it's a global podcast, but nonetheless, this is one of those US-centric issues. How do you develop a real conversation in this country with the Senate, with the House, with politicians at local levels who are probably, for want of a better word, ignorant of the issues you're talking about?
Actually, this one would be a perfect question for Jared. Jared is more knowledgeable about the inner workings of the U.S. As a Washington insider, if I can say that, Jared.
Sure.
I think that was a compliment, Jared. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it was maybe a backhanded compliment. No, I'm just kidding. But look, I mean, I think that there are definitely members of Congress who are very interested in and focused on the development of science and technology. I think these will be the natural audiences from which to start. Clearly, this is not a party partisan question, and should be the kind of question on which consensus can be developed. I think that there are going to be people that will want to try to develop a U.S. regulatory framework that will, on the one hand, provide minimal guarantees and protections for the American public, but not stifle innovation and entrepreneurship in the development of these new technologies. And as is the case with all emerging technologies, this is the kind of circumstances where getting that balance right will take a lot of thought and a lot of hard work. One of the things that Rafa has referred to previously, when one thinks about protections that would happen at a national level, is in essence analogizing information being read or written to the human brain as almost akin to organ donation. And as a rough comparison, I think that's right. If you think about organ donation, for example, when you get a driver's license in the United States, you're asked, do you want to be an organ donor? And then the forms that you sign are pretty onerous, and making it very, very clear of exactly, under what circumstances your organs could be harvested if, God forbid, you're in a serious or fatal accident. And so, I think that you do need those kinds of protections, really a lockbox around your brain and the ability of people to read it or to write to it, without your direct and explicit and informed consent. So I think there will be an interest in engaging on these kinds of questions. The now not so new Obama administration, some 6 months in, has yet to really focus on these kinds of questions and issues. They're, drinking water from the proverbial fire hose on many, many different topics. But undoubtedly, given that much of this emanates from the Brain Initiative that President Obama put in place with the help of people like Rafa and others, I think our hope and expectation is that the Biden White House will also want to engage in these issues, not just the Congress.
Let me end by asking a time question. In the nuclear space, we have a doomsday clock that is periodically reset a few seconds to midnight, trying to encourage people to do what they ought to do anyhow in terms of controlling the proliferation of nuclear weapons. When it comes to this space, and Rafa, I guess this is a science question in the first instance, how much time do you think we have to get our arms around this issue in a positive, productive way?
Two answers, because as I said before, there's two types of neurotechnology. One that are used to read, to decode mental activity, and ones to write or interfere with mental activity. For the decoding, I think it's pretty urgent. I think there's already portable brain scanners that are starting to be sold, and they could theoretically be decoded with artificial intelligence for a low-level investigation and indagation of people's mental state, for example. So we're not going to see reading of thoughts right away, but the beginning of that is about to happen. So I would say for decoding, the doomsday clock is, I wouldn't say it's, or clicking is ringing, but I would say within a couple of years, this will happen for sure. No? Now for the writing part, we have more time. I would say at least a decade or two. And that would be, for me, that's the really worrisome scenario, because what we're talking is about mentally enhancing humans. And we're talking about building a new type of species, a hybrid human, in which part of our brain will be devices that would be running artificial intelligence algorithms and connected to huge databases. So this could be a transformation of humanity, no? And I don't think we should be waiting 10, 20 years to see that coming, but we should start thinking hard today as to what type of human we want to be, decide that in a global, worldwide discussion, and enshrine that in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which describes as good as any document what it means to be human. So I think, again, from your doomsday clock, the real worrisome is the one that's coming probably 10 to 20 years from now, and that would involve mentally augmenting humans with neurotechnology and transforming us into a hybrid human-machine type of species.
Thank you for that. Let's stop there, because I'm not sure what can be added other than these really are urgent issues that both require citizen engagement, but also, equally importantly, wise government intervention. So again, Rafael Yuste, Jared Genser, thank you very much, both for your work on these issues and for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us. Please rate our show on Apple Podcast and subscribe. Meanwhile, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or you can subscribe to our newsletter at Tällbergfoundation.org to learn more about our work. That's TALLBERG Foundation.org. Thank you, and we'll be back again next week for another episode of Tällberg's New Thinking for a New World. This podcast was brought to you through the generous support of SNF, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.